Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. And as I outlined last week, the next 3 weeks is all going to be about market mapping. And today we're going to look at the client side of market mapping. The candidate side we're going to touch next week. And then the final week, we're going to touch on the technical side and how to maximize your data and work from there. This series actually has been sponsored for the first time. We've actually required a sponsor for this from a company called MarketMapper, with MarketMapper spelled market and then MAPR at the end. I'll drop their web address and email address, etc., into the chat if you want to have a look at that from there. And this week I'm joined by Paul Jacobs. Paul Jacobs is back in the saddle. So
Hello,
welcome back, Paul.
Nice to be here.
So let's kick things off and let's explore client market mapping, the strategic approach to business development and client mapping. So I'm going to test your knowledge, Paul, because obviously when you were at Office Angels and stuff like that, I'm sure you were market mapping everything and working from there. So where do most agencies go wrong when they first attempt client market mapping?
Look, I think, Howard, what you've got to do before you even consider rolling out accurate market mapping is to fully understand what market mapping you want to do. And that sounds like an odd thing to say, but you can't be a generalist in this particular exercise. You have to decide what it is you're going to do. And I just to expand on that point just very quickly, I think this is about specializations to a large extent. So where are you going to specialize? What are you going to specialize in? And to that extent, it's about understanding who your competitors are, what they're doing, and analyzing where the gaps might be. But it's also about making decisions about your verticals, your geographies, the levels at which you want to make your discoveries. So are you looking at senior levels? Are you looking at junior levels? It's also, I think, about understanding what kind of organizations are most likely to be looking for staff. So there's an awful lot. It's like a sort of onion, isn't it? There's a lot of layers to unpeel. And I think one of the reasons why recruitment businesses don't always get it right or sort of foul at the first hurdle is that they don't have a clear understanding of what it is they're trying to actually map. And that's the essential point. Now, I know it sounds a bit obvious, but it's very easy to just race into, right, we're going to get into this new market, let's crack on. And I hear people often talk about, I want to break into America, for example. And my first question back is, which state in America? What type of companies are you going to talk to? And so on. So it's being very defined in your thinking, but to get to that point requires a great deal of research.
I think I'm going to add a little bit to that, because I think you're alluding to that it's very much for a niche market to develop a niche market. But I also think if you're a generalist market, there are tools out there now that can generally map a market within minutes, let alone seconds. So you could actually start to do that from there. But I think the real thing where agencies go wrong is that most recruitment agencies have this vanity sort of thought process that everyone in their market knows them and they know everybody in the marketplace, when in fact they only know a very small portion of their marketplace, and of that market the rest of the market is absolutely obsolete to them. So when you start to attempt to market map using the traditional methods of CV stripping, reference calls and LinkedIn, etc., these methods soon get ditched, because I think it's time consuming, and consultants in general don't like to do those type of tasks. So I think all that data you're collecting and then sometimes storing is often not easy accessible. Consultants put them in a weird place, etc. So you don't see the actual benefit for it. So I think if you're not constantly adding new data to your market or developing a business process, then what you're doing is fishing in the same pool all the time. So if you've got, let's say you've got an emailing list or a client list on a CRM of, say, 2,000, but let's say your marketplace is 20,000. And out of those 2,000 clients, you've only got probably 100 clients buying. So you've got a very small portion of the marketplace, but we haven't got the time to find those other, 18,000 clients. So if you keep fishing in the same pool, what happens is your pool gets smaller and smaller and eventually dries up. So you've got to start to expand your market out. And it doesn't matter how small your market is, there's always new clients cropping up, there's always clients growing, and there's always clients scaling. Okay. And there's also clients going out of business. So if you're not refreshing your market, then you've got a massive problem. And I think that's the thing that most agencies forget about, is that they only know a very small percentage of the market. The rest of the market is massive and they're obscure to that market, yet they're not mapping it and adding that to their pool that they can start to fish out of. So I think we've got to start to get that into our heads, is that we are obscure and we have to change that obscurity. So I know we spoke about this one sort of earlier on, Paul, in our 5-minute catch up before we go live. So how do you keep a client market map current without creating administrative nightmares?
I think that the key phrase is current, because one of the things that we have to say here is that creating a market map isn't a one-off task. You don't come up with your map and then say, right, that's done. This is an evolving project, and you need to be understanding, as I said earlier, which particular clients are going to sort of fit the market you wish to develop, and then you are watching those clients very regularly. So it's about attaching, I think, if you can, AI and tech, but certainly using some of the obvious things like the job boards and LinkedIn to really assess what's going on with your clients, looking for the hot spots, looking for the signs that they're taking on staff, and making sure that you're on top of that on a daily basis, really. I think it can be an administrative nightmare if you are considering doing it purely on a manual basis, but there are so many tools available, free tools as well. Before people worry about spending lots of money on AI and tech, there's lots of free tools available. I mean, an obvious one would be Google Alerts, for example, which will notify you when there's any news about a particular customer hitting the web, and that's for free. So there's an awful lot of stuff out there, not least your opportunity to look at their own websites, the client websites, and look at job boards to assess what roles are coming up, and of course through LinkedIn to understand what posts and blogs are being put out there and roles and so forth. But I think I also said earlier, and I just want to make this point, you've got to understand where your competitors are at. What are they doing? What type of roles are they advertising? Because again, you're going to be looking at their websites regularly, trying to assess who they're working with, which is often not as difficult as you might think. And I think questions you need to be asking yourself, perhaps we'll get into a bit later on, is what is it that your business is going to offer customers that is not already being offered by your competitors, perhaps maybe better than you could? Where's the gaps? What is it you're going to do or give that's going to make a difference? And I think that in order to understand, as I said earlier, your market map, you need to define what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. But this point here is that, and I think you're going to expand on this, try to mechanize it if you can, try to automate it so that you're not spending a huge amount of time every day or every week updating your market map. Try to use the tools out there to establish the information and get that constantly coming in. And we'll talk perhaps a bit later about what a market map actually looks like, because I think you can actually visualize that market map through a range of sort of visualization prompts, so diagrams and spreadsheets and so forth. It sounds pretty dull, but there's an awful lot that you can do internally, again at no cost, to map out who the clients are and what is actually going on with them, to prevent yourself from having to reinvent the wheel every week.
So I'm going to challenge the old school there and put some new school into it. And I'm going to look at this and say, can you imagine getting a new starter? And we've all had, if you look at our careers, Paul, we've had lots and lots of new starters. But can you imagine giving a new starter and presenting to them, here is a whole list of clients. Here's a whole list of clients, names of the buyers within those clients. Here's their email addresses. Here's those telephone numbers. These clients have already been in an email campaign and they're already starting to warm up. Oh, and by the way, here's a whole list of candidates that match what those clients want. That's when you start to talk about the power of market mapping. And you're right, there's lots of tech out there, there's lots of data out there, there's lots of AI out there that can do this type of thing. But then what you tend to find then is, and I've come across this already, that loads of companies are buying loads of tech tools And then what happens is some consultants use those, some don't, etc. And then sometimes that tech doesn't connect to the CRM. So you've now left with a problem of what you do with all this data and where this data comes. So to stop creating that administrative nightmare, what I would do is I'd take it out of the recruiter's hands. If there's technology that can do that on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, weekly basis, whenever you've got a role in, or depending on the size of your market and the business that you want to run, then you can start to extract that data as and when you need it. And whether that data can be extracted from your CRM or from LinkedIn or from the job boards, and then it's down to your job as a administrator in there that you could program your tech to actually code your clients, your candidates, etc., accordingly. So then you can start to find that data and find it quickly and start to use it in, your email campaigns, etc., etc. So it's not just about putting them into the list and using the data. It's about identifying the size of client, the player, as you said, their competitors, but they're potential competitors for the clients as well. And then you start to build that market. And we discussed this last week about, you need to innovate. So knowing what your client wants and what your client pain points are, and have in-depth knowledge about the candidate market, their competitor market, their market in general, is really important. And if done simply or correctly, that's a very simple exercise. And I don't want to sell MarketMapper because they're sponsoring the series, but that's a simple tool that can collate, give me a list of clients that are in this industry. Give me a list of buyers that buy for that client. Now give me a list of email addresses and telephone number for those clients. Now give me every candidate that would match those clients' needs. That is revolutionary compared to what we've got at the moment. And that can be almost done at a touch of a button by programming certain things in. So I always think about this. If I looked about a new starter coming into my business and I could give them that detailed information, and I've already started to warm those clients and candidates up through email campaigns, how much is that going to accelerate their ability to bill and their knowledge of the marketplace right from the get-go? And so I think we're taking market mapping to a whole deeper level than just planning it out as we have before. So if we move that on, because I think this is the bit that you were alluding to, how do you structure a client market map to reveal the cross-selling and expansion opportunities within your existing client base?
I think there are a number of ways that you can do this. Now, I don't think this is going to come as a great shock to people listening today that very often we find ourselves in a position where we're providing staff, whether that's permanent or interim staff, to an organization. And we have conversations with clients where they say, oh, great, we've just won a new client, Joe Bloggs and Co. And when you ask a few questions, you discover that we've actually been able to establish a relationship with one person that works in that organization. That's great, tremendous. So we are supplying staff to this very happy contact, and that's terrific. What we're not doing very often is to explore how we can start to understand who else is a potential buyer of recruitment services within that organization. And you do that by leveraging your relationship with your existing client. Now, that takes a little bit of time, but it also comes about by asking the right questions. You can do that when you're speaking to your warm sponsor within the organization by asking simple open questions. Who else apart from you deals with recruitment businesses and so on? And it's about mapping that client. You actually have to, and I used to do this when I was running business development divisions, you have to literally put together a map, an organization chart of the people in the organization, and that pretty much on a monthly basis, because of course people get promoted, they leave companies and so forth. So we need to know, apart from the person or people that we're dealing with, who else within that organization are likely to require recruitment services, and can we people who already like our services to make us an introduction, because it's a huge leg up if we can ask them to just do us that very kind favor, particularly useful if you go and visit them and you're actually inside the building and ask those questions. Maybe they'll even walk you down the corridor and introduce you in person to certain individuals. That's something that's pretty simple, but when you talk to consultants particularly, they don't do that. They'll work pretty hard at continuing to develop their relationships with their existing contact, but they're pretty much unaware of who else within an organization is likely to require recruitment services. And the additional point, and it's an important point, is that the people that tend to use our services are often not the people who make big decisions about which recruitment businesses they're going to use going forward. Those decisions get taken up by what we call financial purchasers. These are FDs, these are CEOs, these are heads of department. These are people that are often invisible to us, procurement people, HR people. And we have to find a way of getting introductions to those people to try to get to understand them, what they need from recruitment businesses, and it'll be different for each particular purchaser or buyer, and start to offer them what it is they're seeking, which may actually be beyond just pure recruitment services. Now, all that requires time. There's also another thing here worth mentioning, and that is just a simple exercise internally, which is to put up over the last 4 or 5 years your spend reports. Who's spent money with you, which particular organizations, and then, if you like, color code them. Have they used you for permanence? Have they used you for interim staff? Where's the crossover? Can you see it? Very often when you do this, and you'll see it particularly true with most organizations, is you'll see lots and lots of companies using perms, very few of those companies using us for interims. Sometimes that works in reverse. So it's an obvious point, but are we maximizing our presence within an organization? And also geographically, just the final point, we may be working with a business close to us, but are we aware of their multiple locations? And again, how do we start to get access to the recruitment purchasers in those other locations? And once again, the answer is using the people that we already work alongside. Most new business comes from working harder at developing new business, as it were, from existing clients. It's much easier to win new business from people already using our services than it is to go cold with brand new companies. That isn't to say you shouldn't do that, but if you're looking for a very quick acceleration to develop new clients, go look at the people that have used you in the last 5 years, start asking questions, start to establish whether there are other people that can give you new business.
So I think it's not about just mapping a market. It's about mapping who works for who and where, and it's about who's connected to who and why. So looking at past employers, where employees move on to, who are the client competitors for staff, what does that client do, who's a competitor in that place. And so your structure of your market map can be as simple as a single client, but it can also be complex as a geographical segment of a marketplace and who's connected to who. So I think it's that data and that knowledge that aids an agency to find their ideal client persona, find other clients that match that persona, and then link and aid the initial contact method to find, as you said, the right head to hunt and work from there. And I think every client has 4 personas inside an individual client. You've got the stranger, the prospect, the buyer, and the promoter. Now, most agencies, as you've said, there is, businesses over a certain size, there's 5 to 7 people within that sort of link of making that decision. We're normally talking to the bottom person on that link. Now, if we make that person a buyer, great, but can we make that person a promoter who can then push us to other people? And so even if you think about every client and every candidate has the potential that you can headhunt and move either from a recruitment point of view or from a placement point of view. So your market map's job is to identify all of those people, the buyers within the client, and the candidates that they need, and how they're all connected. And I think that's the bit that starts to really win. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, how they're connected, because that knowledge enables you to outperform your competitor. It gives your client the knowledge that you actually understand your market. But also over time, what it does, if you've properly mapped your market from a client point of view and a candidate point of view, it reduces the overall cost of acquisition of that client and that candidate by using methodologies such as 6 degrees of separation. We all know that 6 degrees of separation, within 6 people, you'll find somebody that you know that they know. And if you start to use that, then your cold call becomes a very warm call, and your ability to open links is very good. So getting your buyer to become a promoter, to introduce you to your strangers in the client, to then create a prospect and then follow the chain round again is what we should be doing. But if we don't know who those people are, then we tend not to do that. We tend to be lazy and just stick at the person that we get the jobs from rather than move it. So I'm going to challenge it on this question, Paul, because I think we've answered some of this question in the question that we've just answered, but I think there's more to add to it. So how do you prioritize which contact within a mapped organization to nurture versus those to deprioritize?
I mean, it's a really good question. I think you need a bit of a heat map, if I can use that expression. I think it's understanding pain points. So, what do we know about those individuals? I mean, it's one thing building up your organogram and understanding who does what and who's likely to be using recruitment services, whether they are financial purchasers or end users or their procurement people, and so forth. That's all well and good, and that's something you have to do. But it's also important to understand what their pain points are. So, do you know whether somebody's having high staff attrition? Are you aware of which areas of the business and who is responsible for recruiting where there's high staff turnover? Are you aware of new wins, new contracts? And again, who's responsible within that organization for addressing those new wins? Are they expanding? Are they opening new offices? Again, who do you know that's involved in that? Can you find that out? What tech are they rolling out? What's that going to mean for the business? What are they launching? What new products might they be launching on? And so forth. And a lot of that information can be gleaned from what's going on the net. So, I said earlier, make sure that you're aware of what these clients are doing by establishing tech to help you. And even, as I said earlier, free stuff that will provide you with the information without you doing an awful lot. In fact, if you use Google Alerts, for example, they'll send you the information without you having to lift a finger. So look around, understand what's going on, be consistently looking at those clients' websites. As I said a moment ago, be aware of who your competitors are working with and be looking at their websites, but also through your contacts in the organization, understand, if you can, who else is likely to be looking for staff. And those pain points, I think, are super important to understand. So it's kind of a heat map. And if you're looking at where's the priorities, who to deprioritize, I think the answers come from having a deeper understanding of what exactly is going on in that company. Now, I know we say this constantly, and I know it's not so easy any longer, but getting regular client face-to-face meetings will provide you with a huge amount of information around this. But of course, turning up for the meetings isn't just about rocking up with a bag of cakes. It's about making sure you prepare in advance and be thinking really hard about what information it is you're trying to get, not just from the individual that you're going to be meeting and understanding their needs and their pain points, but also understanding in advance what questions you're going to be asking to delve deeper into the organization, to do, as you said earlier, Howard, this upselling, cross-selling exercise. So it's really understanding what's going on, who specifically in the organizations that you're targeting are likely to be having those moments of anxiety and panic, and be into them before it becomes a problem. So a lot of this is market intelligence. It's about client intelligence, but also, and you made the point, and I know next week you're going to be speaking a lot about this, but you get a lot of that information from candidates. If you're consistently daily speaking to candidates, understanding where they work and understanding by asking them the questions about what's going on in the business, that too will provide you with the lead generation that you're looking for to help you with your market mapping.
So I'm going to come to Rob's question. So Rob's asked a question, when it comes to market mapping, sometimes it's overwhelming when you look at the perspective of target clients and how it's best to make more focus so that you're being more efficient with your time and approach. So we are going to cover that, Rob, and I'm going to sort of cover that this week and next week as well. But I think I was taught this when I was first cutting my teeth in recruitment in the early 90s, that if you purely look at clients, and I say we'll cover candidates next week, then it's simple, but again, it's something that recruitment tends to miss. And you're talking about building an in-depth client map, Paul, from there. Yeah. Now, when I was taught this, we were taught Porter's 5 forces, and one of Porter's 5 forces are who are your threats? Now, obviously, you've got an outside threat from your competitors, absolutely. But more often than not, it's actually looking who the threat from inside the business is. And it was those people
Yeah.
that we start to work. And actually, some of those people will then, you'll find, are the decision makers. And as I said earlier, you know, if you look at any company between 50 heads and 200 heads, there's usually between 5 to 7 people involved in any decision making process with regards to recruiting people. So in general, if we're dealing with the last person in the chain, then logically it says that decision has been made way before that last person. So whether that's the CEO, the director, the head of HR, head of procurement, area managers, how many areas have they got? Yeah, there's loads of that. Divisional managers, how many divisions have they got? Talent advisory teams, and that list goes on. So you could have loads and loads of people in there that we could be approaching that we suddenly find. Now, what tends to happen when we get comfortable with a client, as you said, we stay with that one point of contact. And if that point of contact is purely a buyer and not a promoter pushing you into other people, then we've got a problem. But if we've mapped the marketplace and we put a prioritization on the clients that we want to speak to and the clients that we might not want to speak to within that single client, can your buyer promote you across that chain? And that's the bit that we tend not to do, because we tend to get very focused just on the person that is giving the jobs out and forgetting about all the people around there. So in some companies, especially small companies, that might be just one person. But in the bigger companies, we know there's lots of people involved in that decision-making process. So sometimes it's about, if you want volume requirements coming through to your business, it's about having volume clients, not just one client that's giving you volume. And therefore, we've got to start to look at our business development process and work from there. And so I was often, in the last 6 months, I've been asked an awful lot, what's the difference between clients who are succeeding in this market and clients who are failing? And there are clients who are in the same market that are succeeding and in the same market that are failing. And there's a very simple reason why. The clients that are succeeding have choice because they are speaking to more clients. And because they're speaking to more clients, they are getting more jobs, and they can choose the jobs they work on rather than being desperate to fill the job that they have. And that choice gives them opportunity. But how they've got to that choice is by mapping their marketplace and speaking to many people within the marketplace. And that's what we start to think. If you want to prioritize contacts, absolutely. But then there's certain contacts in there you deprioritize. And I think you've got to start to think about the ones that have got the most influence. They're the ones that we should be talking to. As you said, if you're looking at, say, thinking about America, there's a couple of people on here today that sort of work that American market. If I'm speaking to a UK business and I'm dealing with a UK business and I want to break in American, I know they've got an American counterpart, that is the person who should be introducing me, promoting me into that American marketplace. But if I know who that person is in America and I say, Paul, can you introduce me to Dave? And they now know that I know Dave or know of Dave, it makes that introduction a lot easier. But if I'm asking them to help me broker a deal, sometimes they're not interested in that because they feel that, why am I helping you? So if I can help that smooth that path over, it makes it so much easier. So if I know that market information, that's a whole different place to be. So here's an interesting one. Can you demonstrate how using competitor intelligence within your client map can create urgency or differentiation?
I've kind of alluded to this earlier. I think we spend very little time looking at our competitors in our space. I think we're aware of who they are, but we don't really analyze what they're up to terribly often. And I think a large part of this is there's a couple of things that I'd personally be very keen to understand if I was putting together my market map and keeping on top of it. I'd want to look at what roles they're advertising. And I'm sorry to sound a bit provocative here, but sometimes consultants can be pretty lazy when they write ads on jobs. In other words, they make it pretty easy to figure out who those clients are. Sometimes they can be so lazy they literally copy and paste the job descriptions that they've been given by the clients without actually making any amendments or changes. So actually discovering who those clients are becomes even easier. So you can figure out very often which clients they're representing. And I think that obviously is pretty useful, especially if you're consistently seeing roles from that particular source. That clearly is a big target for you as a competitor. The other thing I think that you've got to look at is what is it that, and you've just made a point here, Howard, about our clients. Some clients do well in a difficult market, others don't. That's also true in our industry. So who are the competitors that you have in your space? What are they doing? Why are some of them seemingly doing better than others? What is it they're doing differently? And I think when you look at that, and we've had conversations about this a lot over the years, it isn't that they're necessarily doing a better job than you when it comes to the whole recruitment process. Probably you're on par with them, maybe even doing a better job. But their image may be stronger, their brand may be stronger, they may be offering additional services, added value services to their clients. They may have a much better procedure or procedures around contacting clients, seeing them regularly. And as I said, providing their clients with market intelligence or HR expertise and so forth that gives them the edge. And if you're going to attack their clients, then it's going to be pretty important for you to understand where the gaps are. Where are your competitors weak? Where can you provide stronger service against their weaknesses? Where are you weak? How do you strengthen your own weaknesses? I think those things are super important if you're going to start to look at customer intelligence. How are you going to get yourselves involved in those clients of theirs? Now, the other point here worth making a mention of is that if your competitors are already have already tied up those clients, so you know that they have exclusive agreements with that client, or they have they're involved in a PSL, for example. I think understanding when that opportunity might come up for you to start to get involved with that client is also important. If your competitor has just won a large contract with a client, it's signed, sealed, and delivered, it's a legally binding contract, your chances of doing much business with that client is pretty remote. You need to understand where will the opportunity come along. If it's a 2-year deal, when do you start attacking that client? There's not much point in going after them in the first 12 months with any great effort because you're not going to get very far. So again, understanding what kind of relationship your competitors have with those clients is going to help you to prioritize or deprioritize which clients to go after. But I do want to make this point again. What are your strengths? How do you strengthen those strengths? Where are your weaknesses compared to your competitors? How do you strengthen in those spaces? And again, I think even though it's important to understand what your competitors are up to, it's also, in a sense, more important to focus on yourselves. I mean, yes, understand what your competitors are doing, but be very aware of how you consistently strengthen the services you provide. And we've, as I said, spent a lot of time talking about the future of recruitment, and the great recruitment businesses, the successful recruitment businesses, are going to become very embedded with their clients, not just in providing great candidates, but also supporting their activities in a range of other ways. Using our expertise, using our knowledge, becoming true recruitment partners. And I think those areas are where you can make a difference. But being aware of your competitors' activities and their clients is certainly a very important part of your strategy going forward.
So I'm going to break competitors down into 2 areas so we get back into true market mapping. You've got your competitors to your client. So as I said earlier, for staff in their marketplace. But as you said there, Paul, you have competitors in the recruitment business who's feeding from your trough or freezing you out of that trough completely where you want to do. And I'll give you an example of using data and intelligence and how it worked. So one of the biggest clients I broke into was in the clothing industry, a big manufacturer in Leeds, who's now gone under, very big high street name. And in the 90s,
was it Burton's by any chance?
It was. I couldn't get anywhere. I couldn't get anywhere near this client, and he had his favorite recruitment agency. And I asked him why. I just got to the end of the tether and asked him why, and he gave me a very flippant, sexist comment about why he was working with a different agency. And so I turned around and then said, okay, so let's have a look at your business and how your business works. And he said, okay, tell me how my business works. I listed all his permanent staff because I'd already mapped his permanent staff. I listed all his contractors. I told him who'd left his business in the last 6 months and who he'd interviewed in the last 6 months. And he just said, right, and put the phone down. and then rang me 20 minutes later and said, "What are you doing Monday?" And I said, "I'm assuming I'm coming to see you." He went, "Damn right you are." And I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because I've just rung my recruiter. She couldn't even name the people she'd placed 2 months ago. You've listed 90% of my staff." And so even though it's a sort of veiled threat that, I know who your staff are, I can take your staff and place them elsewhere, the fact that I knew his market and knew who was going out, who was going where, demonstrated to my client that I had absolute market intelligence. The intelligence that my competitor didn't have, because it was in such detail and such refined. And this was the time we were doing it on Rolodex, so I was writing on every single client and, all what's going on. But what it did, it gave me that opportunity to demonstrate to the client how connected to the market I truly am. And that helps you to push beyond the usual objections that you get from clients and enables you to pitch differently to the client, because you know the marketplace and you can say, "I know people at this company, this company, this company, this company, this company that are absolute matches, not just from a technical point of view or a skill point of view, but from a value and a behavior point of view, from a will point of view." So it's a very different from a recruitment from a perm, temp and contract viewpoint, but it's that knowledge that gives you the opportunity. And as I said, sometimes you want to map the marketplace, and I'm going to answer Rob's questions next. Sometimes you want to map the marketplace for clients that you want to deal with and clients that you want to fish from. And there's very two different clients. You don't deal with every client, because every client, if you deal with, that causes you a problem, because you should have a no headhunting policy with your client to a certain degree. So to me, it's knowing which of those clients and how they do that. So how do you then translate a client market map into a 90-day action plan with specific touch points and objectives? And I think this is going to help Rob and answer Rob's question.
I'm going to start with, let's look at our warm leads. Let's look at who we're already engaged with. We made this point earlier. Where can we do more business with them? You used the phrase cross-selling and upselling, Howard. That would always be my first position. If I've got a client and I deal with them, and I'd go back over the last 2-3 years. I would look at even 5 years. I would look at current clients, lapsed clients. Now, an important point here, and we've made it earlier, is that we talk about clients in the terms using the names of the customers, i.e. the name of the company. Really, the reality is very often we have a relationship with the human being rather than inside that business, rather than the actual organization. Now, those people, the people we develop relationships with, like any other employee, move around. They don't always stay for years and years and years in the same organization. Are we tracking those people? The people that would have given us business a year ago, 5 years ago, where are they now? And it's easy to find them, clearly. LinkedIn will tell you that. There are other methods as well. Where are they? You developed a relationship with that individual. Where are they now? Are they still within that business? And what's their role now? Or have they moved on somewhere else? And can you reach out, contact them, be a great door opener into a new business? I think that it's a super important point. Another important point, and almost on the same level, are candidates. We talk about candidates and clients as being separate entities when we really know that it's the same person. We just catch them at different points in their career cycles. 1 minute they're a candidate, then we place them, then they become a client a year or so later. So look back over the last 3 to 5 years at the people we've placed. Where are they now? Are they in a position where they can purchase recruitment services? Can we speak to them? And so I think those are two pretty obvious areas to look at. Existing clients and reaching in, understanding who we work with, how we leverage that relationship, how they can introduce us to other people within the organization. To your point earlier, Howard, geographically, can we work with that organization within the UK or indeed internationally? So I would start there. I would also look at, and this comes back to the earlier point, who are our weaker competitors? If we've done our market mapping and we've looked very hard at our competitors in our space, who in our opinion isn't doing terribly well? And why do we think that's the case? And we can actually even look at their consultants and their backgrounds, so we can get a feel for the quality of individuals they actually employ within their own business, let alone feedback we receive from the clients when we speak to them. And if we're going to attack our competitors' clients, why not start with the weaker competitors, the people that we can pick off more easily? I mean, as I said a moment ago, if our stronger competitors have got legally binding agreements with some of those clients, it's going to be much, much more difficult to penetrate and get involved with those organizations. Not impossible, but much more difficult. Why not make life easier and go after our competitors that are, in our opinion, hopefully we're correct, are not as strong as others? It makes more sense to do that. So to my mind, it's doing that, but it's also, and I'm going to add it because you'll talk about it next week, but we need to be talking to candidates regularly every single day, 10 to 15 meaningful calls logged on our CRM, and pick up at least 3 leads from each of those candidates, because candidates will give you information. The old adage about candidates lead you to the money is still as true today as it was 50 years ago. So let's gather that information and use that and put it on our market map. Why are people leaving organizations? What's going on in organizations? Are organizations, through the information we receive from candidates, increasing headcount and so forth? If it was me, I'd be looking at putting together that 3-month plan, and I would tell my consultants, nicely of course, who to actually contact. I wouldn't necessarily leave it to my consultants to make their own decisions on this point.
So I'd take a 90-day plan and I'd simply do this. I'd break it down into the 3 client types. You've got your buying clients, your lapsed client, and your new clients, and create a target list and create objectives for each individual different type of client that you're going with. Okay. I'm currently working with a large recruitment agency, and we've started to do this over the last 2 or 3 months. So we've already gained lots of extra work out of our existing client base because we've gone in with more specific questions. We understand how many people they've actually got there from a temp point of view, from a contract, and from a perm point of view. We knew we had a very small percentage of the wallet spend, so we knew what we were going. So we're now starting to erode other agencies' wallet and taking that into ours. We've started to resurrect some lapsed clients, again, by understanding their structure and speaking to people further up the chain. What we've also done is identify clients that are new to us that look like our best clients. And we've gone into those clients and we've started to target those clients, and we've already had wins out of those clients. And the main reason is because we have mapped the market properly and we know the buyers and we can hit them really quickly. But not only that, what we've started to do, and this again, what we'll touch on next week, is we've also started to map the candidates that those clients want. So when the client says they want something, we're not having to go out onto a marketplace and find those candidates. We already have the candidates. And from a temp point of view, a contract point of view, and a perm point of view, that gives you a massive advantage over their current, agency, who is doing the usual thing, taking a job spec, putting a job spec onto the job boards, waiting for a response. We're already bringing that back because we've mapped the candidates in that marketplace and we've got data on those. So knowing the size of the client and who gives the roles, who signs off, and what specific touch points you have, and having a plan. Now, as you said, I wouldn't give that whole list to people. I'd give a section list. So back to Rob's question, I'd give a very small section of those lists of each 90 days to make sure we're penetrating it. Then the next 90 days, that list gets bigger because you'll have those that have dropped out that we know that we're not getting anything from. You'll have those that are coming through. So we start to replace that client. But what we're doing is we're not allowing the consultant just to invent his client list or her client list and hope that that works. We're giving them strategic operation and strategic data that will help them break that BD cycle of boom and bust, because constantly you'll have new data coming into that cycle that you'll be able to convert into business.
Howard, just I want to add another point. Something that I remember doing back in the Hudson days was that once we identified which particular clients we were going to go after, we also had multiple entry points. So we had the CEO trying to contact the CEO of that organization. We had our CFO contacting their CFO. We had our HR person. Now, I appreciate we were a big business, but even in smaller businesses, there may be opportunities to have 2 or 3 of your people actually identifying their what's the word I'm looking for? Their oppo, if you like, the person that does a similar role to them in that organization, and making contact. If a CEO contacts a CEO, an owner contacts an owner, they're much more likely to get a result and get a conversation than if you ask a junior consultant to try and reach out. So look at the levels and say, okay, we're gonna target this client. You, me, and this person here are going to try and reach out to these individuals in the organization simultaneously.
So peer-to-peer selling is
Thank you. That's the phrase I was looking for. Peer-to-peer selling. Thank you.
There you go. So last question. Okay. So what's the most effective way to map prospects in sectors where you have 0 existing relationships or warm introductions?
Well, again, we kind of alluded to this point earlier, Howard, and I know we're running out of time, but again, I think you're going to get that information from candidates, as I've mentioned. It's going to be looking at roles that are being posted, who's posting those roles from those organizations. I think it's, as I said earlier, it's about making sure that you've said this, is you're constantly pumping new information into your market mapping maps, your market diagrams. And I think it's about really, as I said, having, I think, very embedded processes around constant contact with clients that you've dealt with, and indeed with candidates, which is, again, we're going to be talking about next week, to make sure that that information is constantly flowing back to your business. Warm introductions is the way forward. Clearly, if you are already working with organizations, as we've been talking a lot, that's going to be your best position to grow quickly. And I would always say, do the easy things first. And if you got time, get to the much more difficult things later on. But an awful lot of businesses, and I can see who's obviously listening to us today, have got very long established histories. They will have a tremendous amount of data from current and lapsed clients to really go after, without even having to concern themselves too much with very cold leads.
So I'm going to give a definition of your reactive, because you're reacting to what the clients are telling you, you're chasing jobs, and give you a more proactive way. And I did this with my own recruitment agency with what became our largest client. So we'd been pushing out into this client, and they've eventually invited us to go meet them and have a conversation with them. We ended up signing a deal for about 24 vacancies, exclusive over a certain period of time at 25%. And we were really chuffed. As we were getting up to walk out of the client, the CEO said, and which of your offices are going to deal with this? And we said, we've only got one office. And he went, oh, I thought you were a lot bigger than that. Can you tell me then what you know about my marketplace? Because this client happened to be based in Switzerland. So I knew it was coming, and I'd developed a heat map already. So I opened up the heat map and said, right, all these blue dots that you see here. And he went, yes, they're all clients that have the same technology and the same skill set that you're looking for at the moment. He went, oh, okay. He said, all these green dots, they're all the candidates that we've interviewed and have a full knowledge of what they're doing. He went, oh, right, okay. All these dots, these are all candidates that we haven't interviewed, but we know have got the skill set and we're still chasing down. These are all the people that work for you. These are all the people that have left you. So we mapped the complete marketplace and knew exactly what he knew and what we knew. Now, it took us quite a while to do that, but we were doing that, trying to break into all of these clients anyway, and we were taking that. But we'd taken that and put it onto a heat map and created a heat map, and that visualization of that for the clients. So you really know our market, you really understand our marketplace. We said, absolutely we do. And that signed the deal. That was what pushed it over the line and made it though. So we'd already proactively built that market knowledge and that market intelligence rather than reactively having that market knowledge and going out and finding it for the client. We'd already got that. Now, there are tools that can do that now rather than doing it manually that can automate that information. And that is a massive step forward compared to what it was 10 years ago to what it is now. So there are lots of different ways to map a market, and there are lots of simple ways to map a market. So again, next week, we're going to talk about how to map a candidate marketplace, and then how to use that map to actually penetrate into clients. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about how technology can help us. And Alex Benison from MarketMapper will be joining us on that webinar to talk about that and work on that. So look at that. Now, Valentine's asked whether there are other tools that I could recommend. There are lots of tools I could recommend, but the problem when you start to recommend lots of tools is that they don't connect to each other. So you could look at Apollo, you could look at all the scraping tools, etc., that you could use to try and market map. Okay, but that means you're going to have to about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different tools to map a marketplace. Where what we're trying to say is, if you can simplify that and make it easier, then there are lots of other tools out there that can do that. And one of those tools is MarketMapper, that can simplify it and do it under all one. MarketMapper has been developing over the last 12 months massively from what it was 12 months ago. So it's really worth looking at. But it's all about the data and getting the data. So Paul, thank you very much for your time, much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time, much appreciated. I hope you have a super week, and we look forward to seeing you all again next week, when we're going to look at how we then map that client candidate market map, and how then we can use that to break into clients as well. See you all next week. Thank you very much.